Windows need attention from time to time. And one example of that is if this brick mold casing and blind stop on this wood double hung were rotted. So let's fix it up. Hey everybody, I'm Jim Snyder, and let's talk windows. One way to repair this would be to section in a piece of casing. However, whenever possible, I really prefer to replace the entire length because it leaves such a cleaner look, and it really doesn't take that much extra effort. You'll start by cutting the caulk in between the casing and the siding, or your brick, and then in between the casing and the blind stop at an angle about like this. Now the casing is usually held in place with long galvanized casing nails driven into the framing, so they won't give up easily. Well, there are a couple things you can do to make that casing removal easier. Either dig out the nails with a cat's paw, or cut through the casing about midway up. I'll start by digging in with my flat bar in between the brick mold casing and the blind stop. Now how you pry and where you pry actually matters, and let me clarify that point with this prop. If I pry against the blind stop, it might just push the window frame to the interior, breaking the interior trim loose from the wall, and not even loosen the exterior casing. Instead, I want to dig that pry bar deep up against the sheathing and then pry up and down, not side to side. If the blind stop's okay, then you kind of need to protect it while you're tearing off the casing. So take a little flat bar and tuck it behind here so that while you're prying, you're not going to ding it up. Notice that I have the pry bar here rather than down here to get started. The reason for that is I'm probably going to find a screw or a nail that comes up from underneath the sill nose into the brick mold casing. So if I pry it here first, it's going to tear the sill nose off of the sill, and then I have more to fix. You'll just kind of wiggle it and jiggle it, and when it starts to give, I'll also start prying slightly away from the siding until the casing finally gives up. In this case, I found a nail coming up from the bottom, but it just broke off. You'll have to pry hard. And be careful not to damage the miter of the head casing. I've got some casing nails to pull, and I'll just break off this finished nail at the miter. In my example here, I uncovered raw sheathing from behind that casing, and that's not uncommon, but you might discover a felt paper or a membrane of some sort from behind the siding, on top of the sheathing, and maybe even tied into the window, such as on top of the blind stop, and sandwiched behind the brick mold casing. So it's important to recreate that interface between the membrane and the window when you reassemble everything. So your existing membrane is going to have nail holes in it, possibly some tears. So take a small piece and tuck it behind all that over the entire length, or at a minimum, you want to fill those nail holes and tears with some compatible sealant. Moving on to the blind stop, you'll just need a small flat bar like this because it really won't put up much of a fight. I'll go down here and tuck it behind the blind stop and in front of the balance. And just gently start working it. Yeah, this is going to be pretty easy. And if you can get it in one piece, that will help. There it is. And I have some nails to pull. Now frequently these nails won't have a head on them because they're a production nail. So I found that with a little flat bar and some side cutters, I can gently work them out. Blind stops vary in size and shape, so I can't just run out and buy a new one. Plus, this one fits with tongue and groove against the jamb. So I'm going to make it. I'll use the old one as a template to create the thickness and width. If you have a planer, that's helpful. And I'll need to add the grooves. Find the bottom end sill angle using the original as a guide. This is frequently 14 degrees, by the way, and make sure you're cutting the angle in the right direction relative to the grooves. So easy to get that backwards. Flip it end for end and cut it to length. After dry fitting your new blind stop, you'll want to apply a bead of sealant along the edge of the window jamb. And especially down in this corner. Now the placement of the blind stop is kind of important. You want to align the outside edge flush with the outside face of the jamb. And I'll secure it with some finish nails. I've rough cut my new casing a little bit longer than what I actually need. And I'm going to mark the direction of the sill slope down here at the bottom, as well as the miter up here at the top. And while that may seem rather obvious, it is just too easy to cut them in the wrong direction when you're over there at the miter saw. Go ahead and cut just the bottom end angle. It's usually the same angle as the blind stop that you just cut. For the length of the new casing, it's a safer bet to measure from the longest point at the top to the longest point at the bottom. So all the way up, down, and out to here. Or you can set the casing in place backwards with the long tip of the casing located where it will meet the sill. Then at the top, mark it like a pro. After transferring the mark to the front face, cut the top miter at a 45, but leave the tip of the mark. There it is. Let's apply some sealant up here at the miter, down here at the sill nose, and connect the two with a bead running down the sheathing. I'm going to go ahead and put a finish nail up here. And before I go any further, I want to make sure that this spacing in between the two casings is the same throughout. This is important because either a screen or a storm window might fit in between here. And incidentally, this will usually be in even inches. I want to check it in the middle, down here at the bottom. I'm going to bump this one in just a hair and nail it out. Drive casing nails on the outer edge about every 12 inches or so. You could even use exterior trim screws. And I'll shoot a trim screw up to the bottom just for good measure. To wrap it up, put in the nail holes, caulk on both sides of the casing, and some paint. Thanks for watching.